Good morning, Jim.
Hello, Henry.
How you doing?
Always. Luckiest guy on earth. I'm doing very, very well. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. We've got quite the topic today.
Well, I'm telling you, you know how to pick them.
Yeah.
Whew.
And I think I actually started every single podcast pretty much the same way.
Well, because it was true. And they've just gotten deeper and harder to corral.
Really?
Oh, every one of them.
And this one's been harder to corral? Why do you say that?
Well, we'll get to it. I mean, this is what's so interesting about these topics. And it may not even be something you're doing consciously, but what you're doing is you're diving in more and more and more and more and more and more into the absolutely undefinable, ineffable reality of what's here. It's just been a slow, gentle, timely path. So hats off to you.
Well, hats off to you, because I feel as if I've got the light end of the stick. I don't know if that's an expression, but I feel as if answering these questions is a lot harder than coming up with them.
I'm not even sure. I'm glad you said that, because I'm not even sure that I'm answering these questions. And I mean that in a couple of ways. Number one, that I'm coming up with some kind of answer. We're just moving around in it. But number two, when we get into the state that we get into, I'm kind of not here as a separate entity. I'm participating, but something much bigger happens. I'm hoping that the people who are watching and listening to this are beginning to get a sense of that and realize they can do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that that's paradoxical in a sense, because the way that I've come to understand how you conduct yourselves in these types of situations is that the more present you are, the more absent you are. Mm-hmm. And that's the paradox, where it's like...
Exactly right.
In order to be fully observant of right here, right now, mm-hmm. the mind must be still, and the I is absent. It's gone. Mm-hmm. There's no stories. Mm-hmm. There's no whatever between your ears. You're completely locked in. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I guess some type of energy just flows. But I say, I guess, I don't want to jump the gun, because that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Energy.
Yeah.
So, Mr. George, what are the different ways that you understand the term energy?
Oh, see, this is what I mean. I'm not even sure you want to know the answer to that question. So please be patient with me as I try to kind of make something out of that. I promise you it won't be a handy soundbite. Because energy is such a vast and limitless phenomenon that I'm not sure we understand what energy is much at all. We understand what energy does. We've been studying that for a long time. But knowing what something does is very different from knowing what something is. And given the limits of our human neurology, I'm not sure we're able to fully understand what energy is at the deepest, most fundamental level. We can understand our feeble, analogous internal representations of it, but that's not what energy actually is. So all we can really hope to do here is kind of gently point in the direction of what energy is, and hopefully with a sense of awe, and I mean that, just dumbstruck awe, respect, and utter humility. Otherwise, we're way off of what energy is. So,
can I stop you quickly?
Sure.
So just to recap that, because I think there's quite a lot of overlap with how you started the Spirit podcast, with basically understanding what is an analogy, and that analogy not necessarily being the thing that you're talking about.
Right.
So the common example used in sort of spiritual teachings is like, you're at a Chinese restaurant chewing the menu, thinking it's the food.
Yeah.
Well, the menu's representing the food.
Right.
And so what I'm getting from you here is that energy is so vast, it is so incredible. We can observe what it does.
Yes.
And then we think we know what it is, but actually knowing what it is might not even be a function of the human neurology. We might not be able even to understand what energy is.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in a minute.
I hope so.
Yeah, because it's brilliant. Thank you.
However, it's just very good to take a posture of awe and humility when even broaching the subject, because it's so incredible, so vast, and so complex.
Yeah, and I have to thank you for that. So, because you're setting the tone here when you start talking. I mean, we can go full bore academic and sound like we know what we're talking about, but those are ideas, they're concepts. They're in your mind. Good luck with that if you're dealing with energy. So let's, as we frequently do, begin this humble pointing at the thing with the word. Because energy is a word. It's a symbol. It represents something. It isn't the thing it represents, but it helps us kind of point. So energy, the word, comes from the ancient Greek, ergon, work. Isn't that interesting? Work. And the prefix en, later anglicized to in, ergon, energon, energy, in work. So that's our point of departure. Then we jump from ancient Greek to modern physics. So you sign up for an introductory physics course at any major university, and you get to the energy piece, and you will get some variation of the following definitions. Energy is the capacity for work of some kind. So you see our debt to these ancient Greeks already. Energy is a property of things in motion. Energy is something that could, in principle, cause something to move. And physics has a very, very specific way of defining motion. It isn't just getting from here to there. There's also rotational motion, rotating around a central axis. And if you want to keep this ever-changing, undefinable, whatever it is, localized in one place, you put it into an orbit of some kind, either a circular orbit, an elliptical orbit. And this applies at the atomic level, with electrons whirling around a nucleus of protons, neutrons, all the way up to the astrophysical level, whole galaxies rotating about a central axis. There's vibratory motion, vibration, oscillation, the excitation of those atoms, creating what we call heat. And science has been trying to understand energy by observing what it does and then breaking this thing down that's too big to understand into smaller and smaller bits, called reductionism. And all based on what energy does. They've broken energy down into a number of different kinds of energy. Some of them are potential energy, what they call potential energy, you can almost think of that energy as stored energy, usually created when you move an object against a force of some kind. So if you squeeze a spring together and hold it, in the physics model, you're imbuing that spring with potential energy. You lift an object against the force of gravity and hold it there, you're imbuing that object with this potential energy. It's not moving, but it will if you let it go. So in the model of modern physics, the minute you let that object go, that potential energy changes form and becomes what they call kinetic energy, the energy of motion. And physics has studied that particular form of energy a lot for millennia.
Can I pause you quickly?
Sure.
Great. So just to recap what I'm getting so far is that you're going into the definition of energy, and you started with the Greek ergon, and then followed the history of the word to add the ergon, which is where we get energy, right? Yeah. And it's defined as in work, if we just look at the Greek, and that has a parallel to all of the sort of more, I want to say physical, but in reference to physics,
yes,
in terms of the school of thought,
yeah,
that definition actually has bled through, because in all of the definitions, it's the capacity to do work.
Yep.
Now, what you're starting to mention is like different ways in which work expresses itself.
That's right.
If you have vibration, that is work being done, and that comes across as heat.
Yes.
If you want to keep energy in a localized area, you put it into an orbit.
Yes.
You can see this at many different scales.
Yeah.
You can see this from the atom all the way up to galaxies.
Yep.
And so it's really like a symptomatic expression of our universe doing what it does. And then you started to mention, what did we did orbit, we did vibration, which is pretty much oscillation. Oh, and then we got into storing energy. So you can put energy, not put it, but you can basically...
It's weirdly like that in the model. Remember, it's an analogy.
Yes.
The model of modern physics. You're imbuing, you're putting this stored energy. You, Henry, just lifted that cup. It had this potential energy, right? Then you're releasing it. It's moving as you put the cup back down again.
And it still has some
It still has some there, because if we move the table...
It goes.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Brilliant.
Gotcha. Okay. And so it seems as if I just wanted to pause there and sort of, this is, I have a feeling, is going to get dense. It already has started that way.
Yeah.
So I just want to really punctuate this just to make sure that I don't have, far too much and completely miss the gambit completely.
Well, you're driving. I'm just going along here.
Gotcha. So we got to stored energy. We've done that. We've covered basically different forms that energy can express itself so far. And I'll let you continue on, but thank you for your patience with me.
Sure.
And just making sure that I can put this into bite-sized chunks and actually consume it.
And as you let go of that object or release that spring, whatever it is, that energy changes form. This is all according to a modern physics model of what's happening. It becomes kinetic energy, the energy of motion. And like I said, we've been studying that a long, long time. We've gotten very good and very precise. I say we, I'm saying physics. Very precise at understanding what seems to be happening and how much of this kinetic energy is in an object that's moving. They've got a formula for it. And this energy is equal to half of the mass of whatever that object, your cup, your pen, whatever it is, times its velocity, its speed, squared. And over millennia, there's been an understanding, there's some intrinsic relationship between the mass of an object its velocity squared and the energy contained in it. That's all bound up somehow. You can see it in equation after equation of different ways of measuring energy. And we'll get back to that. So you've got this energy in motion, this kinetic energy. You've got thermal energy. Remember, the excitation of these atoms produces what we call heat, absence of which we call cold. Okay? We've got electrical energy. We've got magnetic energy. And thanks to the work of a brilliant 19th century, here it is for you, English physicist named Michael Faraday, he was able to conceive of that as something bigger than just electrical or magnetic. He conceived of this as an electromagnetic field of influence. He's the first one that really came up with this field idea. It's just invisible. It's everywhere. So these electrical charges, positive and negative charges, attracting and repelling one another magnetically in the same field. Okay, and I promised I wouldn't dive in too far because I love this stuff. I just love it. So you're keeping me from going in there too far. Okay, we've got chemical energy, the attraction and the interaction of those atoms into larger, more complex compounds and their interaction with one another and their effect on the environment. We even have nuclear energy, the energy that's literally binding the fundamental elements of the universe together. Nucleus for, right? Nucleus energy. It's binding these nuclei together. Huge amounts of energy. They call the strong and the weak nuclear force. And we'll climb into that if you want later, or just leave it here. But the point is, we're still talking about what energy does. You haven't gotten to what it is yet. And it's easy to forget that when you've got all this data about what energy does. It wasn't until well into the 20th century that we started to touch on what is energy with the work of this brilliant physicist, our good friend Albert Einstein, who I don't hardly know how to describe this. In his own mind, this was theoretical at the time. Most of it's been proven since then, but at the time, theoretical. He was standing on the shoulders of everybody who came before him, all the way back. He even had a lot of help from his contemporaries. But he comes up with this body of work that he called the special theory of relativity. And that term has almost become a cliche. People talk about relativity, and but it was a remarkable body of work. We can't even begin to touch it here. We can't even really touch a tiny piece of that theory of relativity, but it will help us point in the right direction. And that tiny piece that I'm talking about is this now famous, ubiquitous equation, E equals mc squared. Everybody's seen it, but this is such an elegantly simple mathematical poem that contains so much that it just goes right over our heads unless we're real careful with it. And like I said, we won't even go into it that far, but it's enough that it will set us on the right direction. So let's look at it. E, energy, is equivalent to m, mass, or for our purposes today, let's cheat a bit and call it matter. Mass is a property of matter. times c squared. Remember our relationship in kinetic energy between mass, matter, its velocity squared, and the energy contained in it? Einstein's working with this, but check this out. C squared isn't just any velocity. It's a very, very special, weird velocity. C stands for celeritas, Latin for speed. Speed, the infinitive. And it refers to the speed of light. And in Einstein's model of the universe, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. In Einstein's model of the universe, that is kind of an astrophysical speed limit. Okay? So why is that? I wish we had time. Someday we're going to talk about this because it's so amazing and helpful to understand even a little, but we just don't have time. So, speed of light. Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. Let me say that differently. No thing can travel faster than the speed of light. A thing meaning matter, something that has mass. Light, however, in science's model of it, as photons, has no mass. It can travel at the speed of light. Well, what's the big deal about the speed of light? Well, no object, no thing can travel faster than the speed of light. The reality is no thing can travel at the speed of light. And get this was all in Einstein's mind. It was theoretical. They've since created technology that lets us see what happens. They have these amazing particle accelerators now, the size of cities, big circular things, and they accelerate a proton, the key element to a nucleus. They take a single proton and get it going faster and faster and faster. This thing is taking so much energy to accelerate this proton faster and faster and faster. They got to work late at night so they don't just blank out the city. All its electricity is dumping into this thing. And they have this particle now traveling at 97% the speed of light. This proton, it is taking more and more energy because the faster they go, the more energy it takes until finally it's getting really weird. So at 97% of the speed of light, all this energy they're dumping in to accelerate it is converting to mass. The proton is getting heavier. Now, you read about this in a scientific journal and it's like, yeah, it's fascinating. I hear this and I just go, holy shit. This thing approaches the speed of light and it's getting bigger. It's getting more mass. Energy is being converted into matter. So let's just stop there. I promised we wouldn't go into this, even though I love this, because this literally informs my daily life. It's not some abstraction. So let's just look at this speed of light thing now as a kind of mathematical modifier, a quantifier. We won't even go into what it actually means. A quantifier. How much energy are we talking about? Speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. I'm suggesting there isn't a human being alive who can relate to that. Science takes it and turns it into an abstraction and deals with the abstraction, because nothing at human scale even remotely resembles that. Imagine getting in your car, starting it and driving faster and faster, and imagine driving 670 million miles an hour. It just doesn't even compute. This is what I mean about awe. That's not even the number. It's that squared. We don't even have enough zeros The rest of our podcast, if we did nothing but write zeros, we wouldn't be able to accurately represent that number. That's the quantifier. That's how much energy goes into even the smallest amount of matter. So for our purposes, let's take that c squared and just move it over here. What do we have left? E equals energy is m, matter. Energy is matter. Matter is energy. They're just in different forms. And if energy is matter and matter is energy, energy is everything. It's everything. It's everything you think you see in disguise. This goes into ancient teachings of cultures that are thousands of years old. Energy, let's move it up here. Mass, let's move it down here. Matter. Energy is matter in a continuum from pure, what I call potential energy, unmanifest, not even a hint of mass, all the way down to the densest, most immutable object you can imagine. I don't care what it is, a lead ball. But it doesn't stop changing. It goes right back up into completely unmanifest, pure E. It's a constant dance of this change, but it's all the same thing in different forms. Energy is everything. So, I'm hoping that gives us a point of departure. Nothing but a point of departure to point at what energy is, but I hope it gives us a proper sense of awe, a proper sense of wonder, and a proper sense of humility. You, me, the table, everything, it's the same thing when it takes its disguise off. I hope that means something, because if it doesn't, I can't help. That's all I can do.
It absolutely means something, and I cannot wait to keep unpacking this with you.
Okay.
So what I got from this is that you took us into the different ways that energy can form, right? And even form, that word doesn't quite encapsulate what is going on, because form has a connotation to matter, right?
Yes.
This is in form, you know, information, information. It's like in some type of order, whereas energy doesn't necessarily need to be in any type of order, because you mentioned the thermal energy, magnetic energy, electrical energy, chemical energy, nuclear energy, la-di-da-di-da. There's lots of different forms that this energy can take. However, when looking at and I love that this is, again, relating to so many different podcasts as well, because when talking about what reality is, we get the word res from reality, res meaning thing, and reality is this...
a thing.
It's these things, right? And these different forms that energy has taken. And by looking at what energy is doing, it can kind of help us to point to what it actually is. But even trying to understand what it actually is difficult, because I'm trying to separate you from everything around you to understand that I'm talking to Jim. It wouldn't be very helpful if I'm like, is, everything is, and it's all blurred into one thing. How could I then navigate? And how could I create the useful icons to be able to basically walk around this world? It's far more helpful to have those distinctions and to be able to understand how this energy is working, although it's working with itself in different ways and in different movements. Movements might not be the right term there.
Sure.
You then talked about Einstein, and you really broke down the famous equation E equals mc squared. The big aspect to this is that c is a constant and it's squared, so it's this massive number that we can't comprehend. We really cannot relate to it at all, so we just abstract it and play around in the abstract. However, E equals mc squared, if c squared is a constant, then we can sort of ignore the constant because it's constantly throughout the equation. So we can really zoom in to energy equals mass, but you conveniently related it to matter. Energy equals matter. It's the same bloody thing.
Yes.
And so prior to this, you mentioned how wonderful a job Michael Faraday did with basically introducing the concept of fields and how electricity and magnetism are actually sort of two sides to the same coin.
Yes.
And now talking to energy and matter, it sort of seems like there's something similar going on here.
Yes.
There are two sides to the same coin. It's a different form, right? The matter is a different form of energy as such. And yeah, then you started talking about particle accelerators, trying to get closer and closer and closer to accelerating a proton to the speed of light.
Yes.
And when it got to 97%, it started to increase in mass, which is demonstrative of, you know, it's the energy changing form and becoming mass, which is, again, pretty mind-blowing, especially when you take it from the abstract more into the applicable.
There you go.
It's actually, it gains so much more interest as it becomes, well, at least for me, as it becomes more sort of relatable, as it becomes more sort of interactive in my actual day-to-day, rather than something that's so distant from me that I don't really, that I have to put on a much different sort of cognitive hat that's quite exhausting, right? If I'm just only playing around in extreme abstraction.
Sure. I don't want to interrupt you, but you just made such an important point. I want to clarify something. What you've just said is we value what things are like from our limited perspective at human scale more than we value the truth. I'm not interested in what's actually there. It's too hard. So I'm going to drag what's there into dimensions that it won't fit into, in order for me to think and feel that I understand something I don't even remotely understand. That's what we're doing. As long as we're clear, I'm great.
This reminds me of there's an analogy. Actually, I don't even know if it's an analogy. It's an example used in The Elephant and the Brain, a wonderful book, where it's like you go to a physics conference and they'll be talking about physics when the guy's up on stage. But as soon as he's done with his talk, what does everybody talk about? Right? Everybody just goes right
food.
Well, they go to the food or they go to gossip.
That's right.
It's like, who said what about who? Who's sleeping with whom? Like, who just got a divorce?
What matters?
Yeah, right? And so it's like, it's so interesting to see that. And it's so obvious as well. Like, of course, that's why I love looking at things through like a lens of evolutionary psychology, because it's like, absolutely, this social ape is going to be far more obsessed with status games rather than the truth, especially when it gets more and more distant from anything that's applicable for survival. Right? We mentioned this so many times. It's like, no, actually, understanding who's sleeping with whom and who's trustworthy and not is far more important than for sort of preserving lineage than understanding what happens if a proton goes at 97% of the speed of light. It's
what are you made of?
Well, the energy, the proton, all of it.
So I'm suggesting everything you said is true unless and until we quiet all that down. Then we're talking about shifting into a different domain, a domain that I have never met anyone who couldn't just drift right into effortlessly, what I call stillness. I've met a lot of people who won't because they're tied up in what they're tied up into. That's great. This is available to anybody, and it doesn't require a physics doctorate. It just doesn't. Richard Feynman was first and foremost a curious little boy, very playful. He just also happened to be a Nobel laureate physicist. But he also said something interesting. He was speaking about quantum mechanics. I'm saying let's just apply that same statement to energy. If you think you know what energy is, you don't know what energy is. That sense of wonder that he had, and again, he was talking about quantum mechanics, but quantum mechanics is really trying to get to what energy is. That's why it sounds so weird. It's weird. It doesn't want to come into this little box we call human perception. And that's okay. So what we're left with is what we're comfortable with thinking we know. And like I said, I'm okay to go there too, as long as we're clear that ain't what's there.
Yeah, and it's so funny how we change the scale, we change the scope. We go either very micro or very macro.
Yeah.
And the rules as we know them start to change, right? When
Yes.
you go really small and you go really big, talking about quantum mechanics,
Yeah.
going really small, it's like the rules aren't intuitive anymore. And it's because we're, not necessarily designed, because that implies that there's something that's designing us,
Yeah.
but
We've evolved.
we're evolved
Yeah.
to really understand this narrow band
Yes.
of reality,
Yes.
which is basically just what we perceive,
Yeah.
and we're really good at it. But again, it just comes down to the icon creating meatloaf between our ears.
Yeah.
It's really good in this little band. As soon as we expand either above or below that band, things don't behave the way that we would expect them to.
And that's not just us lay people. Physics isn't even congruent between the quantum level and astrophysics. They're still trying to come up with what they call a unified field theory of the whole shooting match, and they can't. The numbers don't add up. So just know this is a real dilemma, and it's also an adventure. The territory is wide open for anybody who wants to get in there and play. Don't be intimidated by this stuff. Get in and play at whatever level you can.
Well, I think that this is just a bit of a side note, but you brought him up in terms of, I think the reason that Richard Feynman was so successful was that he got everybody's attention, including the smartest people in the world, through his utter charm and ability to simplify complex problems and then to continue to simplify and simplify and simplify and then transmute that to other people in such a way that it preserved his curiosity and made the entry point so accessible for everybody.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that I truly admire, because this type of information, when presented in the right way, is bloody fascinating.
It is.
And anybody who, I have sort of an aversion to certain aspects of physics and chemistry because of how the presentation was not necessarily as appetizing as I would have liked it to have been in my youth. And I correlated that with like not necessarily being good at it, right? And so that creates this sort of like, I don't want to go there. However, if that information is just presented in a slightly different way and you're like, oh my God, this is what's really going on.
Yeah.
I think that that's, it's just a beautiful character trait that I believe you share in common. I love the way that you have already started to break down what energy is. And it actually kind of leads me smoothly to the next question, which is, what is the essence of energy?
So this is why I think how you do this, you, Henry, is so interesting, because I'm not sure how much of this is at a conscious level, but your essence is making this happen. It's a progression. If people will just be patient with this progression, there's a body of understanding that isn't abstract anymore. It's not like going and taking boring classes and getting facts that you spit back. you're embodying this understanding. We're building it. So, if energy is matter, matter is energy, energy is everything. It is everyone. It's everything, everyone that ever was, is now, or will be, or could ever be in any conceivable universe. It is, forgive me for this, the ultimate feminine aspect. At its most fundamental, whether we're talking about the quantum field, we can get into that if you want, in quantum mechanics descriptors. We're talking about some descriptors from 3,000 years ago. We're talking about more classical physics, the physical vacuum, okay? Energy, in essence, is the ultimate source of, motivation for, and ultimate destination of everything, everyone. And it does this. It is this. And energy and matter are the same. They're just in different forms. So matter, anything that you see, anything you hear, anything you feel, try to touch, smell, taste, is energy in disguise. And I'm suggesting one of the most delicious things to do, one of the best ways to spend your time, is peel the disguise away and just drop into what it is. This pure E part of our equation. Unmanifest energy, infinite potential. It can be anything, anywhere, anyone, any why, and any when. It is everywhere. There is nowhere energy isn't in this form. And physics gets teasingly close to this. We'll talk about it if you want. This unmanifest energy, what I call potential energy, the fundamental substrate of the universe, unperturbed. The perturbations of this fundamental substrate are what we call matter. Anything. But we're only able to perceive matter at certain levels of density. If we get quiet enough, our capacity to perceive more and more subtle levels of density goes up. It is ever changing. When it changes slowly, it's almost imperceptible. If it changes quickly from matter into energy, quickly, it can be explosive. Explosive beyond your capacity to even imagine. And we can talk about that too. How much actual matter is converted into pure energy in nuclear bombs. It's frighteningly small. I love this stuff. You got to rein me in because I cannot stress this enough. The atomic bomb that was dropped over Hiroshima, the one that everybody remembers, okay, vaporized an entire city. It was, by today's standards, really crude and really inefficient. They started with, what was it, 63, 64 kilograms. What's that, 140 pounds? What they call enriched uranium, U-235. Most uranium's U-238. I don't want to get into the isotopes. You're starting with 64 kilograms of this crazy stuff, this unstable element. You fire some of that same stuff into it, and it creates what they call nuclear fission, as opposed to nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission. It starts going critical, and this atomic reaction takes place. Out of the 64 kilograms, 140 pounds, picture a 140-pound man or woman, not very much. About 1 kilogram actually went critical and began the fission process. But hear this, the entire energy that blew Hiroshima into vapor came from not less than maybe half a gram of actual matter. Okay? Half a gram of actual matter converted into energy. And it did it within such a tiny fraction of a second that everything else in this device was gone. Everything else was the shock wave from that conversion. A half a gram of matter is what a butterfly weighs. Think about that. How much energy there is in your thumb if you could just liberate it. So, people have talked to me about, why don't you teach physics? Because I want to keep learning it. I love this stuff. But I love it because to me, it isn't an abstraction. It's as real as you and I sitting here. That energy is being exchanged right now. You and I are the willing recipients of that transformative, ever-changing dynamic that is energy. We can feel it. I hope they can too. Does that make sense, or did I just wander clear off the...
No, that makes very clear sense. And I'm curious as to how you're saying that this energy is exchanging between us, and that you would prefer to learn and to play with it rather than keep it an abstraction.
Yeah.
Can you just expand upon that? How do you in your actual day-to-day pull this from an abstraction into an actual observable exchange to make it so much more relatable?
So imagine everything is energy. The question is, where is it on this continuum from E, pure E, infinite potential? This energy is everywhere. It's in empty space. It's everywhere. There is no fraction of a cubic measurement of area that this energy isn't crackling in right now. It is every square millimeter of empty space between you and me is alive with it. And the perturbations of it are just going back and forth. You can feel it. The animals are much more sensitive to this. Sharks are constantly feeling. Dolphins, whales are constantly feeling through their flesh perturbations of this energy. I'm just saying, how sensitive are you? You get from dense material to sound waves moving through the air. You can't see it. They're not, they're nothing you can grab. But just keep heading up toward pure E. Keep heading up toward pure E. What do you think we get into? I'm suggesting you get into these domains we think of as emotions. Now, we can feel emotions, but I'm not sure we're really perceiving what that energy is. It's how it relates in our body. you keep getting more and more subtle. You start getting into the domain of mind. What are thoughts? In a very real sense, thoughts are things. They have some degree, and we'll talk about this, of mass to them, some form. And we'll talk about this, because I'm not talking about something you can toss back and forth and catch in your hand, but we're so sensitive we start picking up on that. Get even closer to pure unmanifest E, you get into what a lot of people call spirit. And then finally, at some weird threshold that isn't a threshold, you're into just pure potential. That's what the universe is filled with in unspeakable amounts. So I'm suggesting that the quieter we are, and you and I got very still before we did this, which is enabling this conversation, I might add. Because if your mind is spinning around on, well, what's for lunch and all that, okay, but you're now down into dense, thick matter. This is lost. You're distracted. You can't pick up on this stuff. Our world is filled with such distraction. If you quiet it down, I'm telling you, it becomes self-evident. You don't need a doctorate. You need a doctorate to figure out how what you're experiencing fits in to this endless story from the dawn of man till now we call science. We're all standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. So we have to have humility and compassion, because we have a lot more than what those ancestors had. If anything, some of them were way more brilliant than we are. We're picking up on this right now. I'm saying energy doesn't come or go, it changes. Energy is propagating. You can perceive it. Does that make sense, or did I just wander into the woo-woo too far?
No, you didn't wander too far. What I got from this is basically I was asking you, how do you make it more relatable in your everyday? And what I got is that there are different forms of energy even within yourself that you perceive at different levels.
Yes.
Thoughts are you have emotions and thoughts, and
Yes.
then what we'll call stillness.
Yes.
Those emotions to start with it's a form of energy, although it's not something that you can like put into a ball and throw to each other, right?
But it does weird things in your body, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you can sort of also use the same analogy to understand that your thoughts are a form of energy.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I was asking you, how do you make this relatable into your everyday, there's an aspect of even going more expansive from the thoughts itself, quieting that down and allowing a different form of energy to be observable within yourself. And that's this stillness aspect.
Yeah.
And then even from that, you can let go of that and just observe pure potential. So in terms of making this relatable, it's like, great, here are these concepts from whether you want to talk about Einsteinian relativity,
right.
or you can even say like Galilean relativity
Sure.
was very helpful, like to understanding a lot of these concepts in terms of how energy can be converted.
Yeah.
You're like, great, these concepts are really cool because they can also be stretched onto my personal experience of observing emotions, changing into thoughts,
Yeah.
how those are interacting with each other, then how stillness helps to expand all of that. And that's really what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. You're doing it right now. I can feel it.
Yes.
And then playing around with all of those different forms of energy within yourself is incredibly fascinating. And so it really helps to open the door as to why you want to play with physics.
Yes.
Because you can get these very rich concepts from brilliant minds abstracting, and you can actually superimpose them onto your own experience, and they're tight-fitting models because they've been honed in through so much abstraction that they're incredibly accurate, and you're like, this kind of fits well into how I'm experiencing my day-to-day.
Yeah.
that could be off. I feel as if I did sort of
No.
connect
It's
some
right
dots
on. Right
that
on.
might not be.
No. It's right on. All I'm saying is, yes, if what you need to do is describe this to yourself, sure, those concepts, the analogies, that's what they're for. Once they become embodied, I don't need an analogy to know what it feels like to be Jim. Being Jim isn't like anything else. That's what I mean. I'm suggesting the only way to really know something is to be it, not know what it's like. That's a step. That helps you understand what things are like. It helps you know about something. If you want to know something, you got to be it. I'm suggesting you are it. You are energy. So am I. You get quiet enough, you're going to come back home. And you talk about practicality. Let's just take what we just talked about and let me ask you a question. How practical would it be to you to be able to look at someone and see through all the bullshit and get right to the energy at the core? Somebody is telling you something, and without the slightest bit of emotion, that's just not true. How useful would that be to you to be able to do that?
It would save a lot of time tripping over the density of thought that might not actually be accurate to what's going on.
And the capacity that we've developed as social animals to somehow couch what's really happening in here and disguise it so it looks like something else to fool you.
And we're not conscious of that.
No.
A lot of the time.
No.
Okay, so I want to just really corner you here.
Yeah, I'm sorry for doing this. I really am, because I can't help it.
You're apologizing to yourself because I'm about to ask you a real... you said no grenades and here comes 6. So you mentioned that unmanifest energy is just this pure potential. Mm-hmm. The only way to know it is to be it. Mm-hmm. Now, you also mentioned earlier how people for thousands of years has stumbled across how to experience this directly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you can see terms that describe energy in Hinduism with Shakti, in Taoism with Qi, in Buddhism with prana. Mm-hmm. It's all over the place. Everybody's describing energy. Yeah. And so my question here for you is, how has our concept or concepts of energy evolved as humans over time? So
again, that's one of those questions. You're not asking what has it evolved to, you're asking how has it evolved. I think that's a brilliant question. It's hidden in the syntax, the brilliance, but my job's to climb in there and get the essence of your question. So I'd like to suggest that from the dawn of humanity, that is, whenever it was we became human, our neurology has been what I call analogous. We've talked about this. We just talked about it 5 times today. That is, we learn by analogy. And in other words, we take qualities and characteristics of what we know or think we know, and we map those qualities and characteristics onto something we don't know. We project what we think we know onto something else, and that process makes us feel more like we know something we don't know. It is exceptionally useful to us as human beings because, as we've discussed, we hate this feeling of not knowing. It's like falling. This analogous process, very useful, especially when it comes to survival. I'm suggesting it's very useful at knowing what something is like. That's what an analogy is.
For example, if you know how to ride a horse, then you can say, what's it like to ride a buffalo? And you have a good idea.
Yes.
But it might be night and day because your legs are spread far wider
Yes.
and the buffalo
Yes.
isn't as smooth.
Yeah.
However, you can go, yeah, got it,
Sure.
whatever. So
Sure.
that's just as an
And
example.
it goes even farther, farther than that, based on what it is we actually know and how different this thing is from that. Because, like I think we said this when we were talking about analogies. Bird is to air what fish is to water. Now, there aren't very many people who will say a fish is like a bird, but if we say that bird is to air, that is, this creature that seems to glide through the air, as fish is to water, if you know a little bit about fish, well, you can map that on. You still don't know what a bird is, but you know more than you did without that analogy. It's very useful. So think about what a hippopotamus is. Break the word down.
Water horse.
Somewhere, probably back in Mesopotamia someplace, somebody saw a hippopotamus and said, ooh, look, it's not a water horse, it's a river horse. Potamus, river. Mesopotamia, halfway between two rivers. And hippos, horse. So somebody said that, analogously, is like a horse, but it's in the river. How many people look at a hippo and think, yep, that looks just like a horse? But if you don't know anything about that, it kind of lets you know what it's like.
Okay, so just to stop you very quickly,
Okay?
when I'm observing the emotion within myself and the thoughts that are forming, you're talking about these analogies, right? And I'm gaining a sense of control,
Yes.
a sense of knowing.
Yes.
And that is giving me a feeling of security,
Yes.
an emotion of security.
Yes.
As you are reverberating hot air between us, you're basically transmuting energy, and I am receiving that energy, decoding it, and then interpreting that code to then give me that feeling sense.
Yes.
That's sort of sat below this conceptual sense of I'm understanding more of how the universe is working.
Yes.
Just to relate this back to what you were mentioning. However, just because I have that sensed feeling of control does not mean that I have any idea of the analog.
But it may mean that you can survive because you're not sitting there freaked out.
And also, it may mean that I can survive because if the analogy is good, it's helpful to be able to predict the patterns.
Yes.
Right? Because with if you say, okay, this is a hippopotamus, it's like a river horse. However, it's got a really strong bite.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, okay, the thing that looks like a water horse has a strong bite.
Yes.
If I'm then, walking up the bloody river and there I see a hippo,
Yes.
it's like, oh, there's the water horse thing that Jim was talking about.
Yes.
Let's turn tail and get the out
Yes,
of here
yes.
because I don't want to know what happens if that thing's got me between its jaws.
Yeah, and because it's a water horse and not a water bird, it's not going to fly after us. So I'm saying that our early ancestors with these analogous nervous systems, okay, this penchant for analogy, were confronted with energy in its myriad forms all around them. From the subtlest murmurings within their own bodies to explosive exchanges of pure matter into pure energy quickly. Because remember, the faster that conversion takes place, the more explosive it's going to be. So our early ancestors look up in the sky and there is this boom, this giant explosion. They don't know from static electricity building up in particles in the clouds and because it's charged in a certain way, seeking grounding to the earth. And no, they don't know from lightning. What do they know? They know who they are. They know their unique, subjective human experience. They project that onto this thing that scares the crap out of them and might be fatal. They project that human representation onto it. What do? Create a God out of it. An angry God. Because that's sure what it feels like. It's what it felt like when my dada got mad at me. Okay. So they've got this image of this dude throwing lightning bolts. It eventually becomes Thor. And it's actually useful up to a point. And what I'm suggesting is we've built on that. We don't want to knock it. We've built upon that. We're standing upon that. We've still got a day of the week named after that. Our ancestors were looking at this thing going across the sky as recently as ancient Greece and Rome. They created gods out of this thing. Helios in Greece, going across the sky in a chariot. That's what they knew. So they projected that onto it. We can get cute and laugh about it, but come on. In Roman times, Solaris, same thing. And we're so far advanced that we can look back on that and laugh at it and call that superstition, because we are standing above. Superstition is an unnecessary and irrational fear of the gods. I'm saying we're standing on their shoulders. Be compassionate. If we were back there with the information they had, we'd be in worse shape. And today, in astrophysics, we still have a Helios. Helios was this Greek god. Heliocentric theory of the Solaris system. We're indebted to this. But that's how it works. These analogies, these representations of what we do know. As we gather more information, we start moving into an era where we're creating something that's a huge leap. We call it the scientific method. All we're doing, and largely due, I hate to say this, I shouldn't say this, but Isaac Newton, René Descartes, Gottfried Leibniz, these are people from an era where they started saying, let's really take a step away from that sort of just pure analogies, and let's really observe this, and let's try to get very systematic about what we're doing. And they did, but they were still standing on this spiritual nature of what their ancestors were doing. They were all highly spiritual people. We forget that. We think they're just pinheads in their minds. So this is progressing. It's evolving. And as it evolves, the cumulative nature of our understanding, some of it can be tested and seems to work according to this scientific method where you create hypotheses based on what you're observing. You test things. And here's the part about the scientific method they don't talk a lot about. You open that up to everyone, even potential competitors, and you say, this is what I'm working on, try to prove it wrong. Keep an open mind, though. Keep an open mind, but try to prove it wrong, because we want to get at the truth. Now, not every scientist has those kinds of ethics, but so our understanding evolves like that. But we're still making analogies. Even in modern physics, we're making analogies to explain things. I don't know if that helps, but that's how this understanding of energy has evolved. And I think we should have compassion all the way back to day one and understand we're standing on the shoulders of these people and be grateful for it. Because in 500 years, if we're even still around, our descendants are going to be looking at how we understand the universe and laughing. We can only hope there'll be those descendants and that this humanity isn't some evolutionary dead end. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I'm in admiration and awe, more so for how well you've been able to really translate a hell of a lot of information, but condense and find the purity in terms of what's the most important in terms of sharing about energy in general. And what I was really getting from that is that there's a series of analogies that have happened all over the world from people that have been observing what you've been talking about before, which is like, great, here's just limitless potential. And, you know, if I'm in India and by the river Ganges and I'm just using the language and the stories that would make the most sense to be able to give this analogy to my culture, you know, I will go ahead and call it Shakti, right? However, if I'm in China and using a completely different set of rituals and techniques, but observing the same thing, I'm probably not going to use the same words for it because, you know, I'm speaking a different bloody language.
That's right.
Right. So it's the analogies have developed. The thing has always been the same.
Yes.
And it's just whether our approach to it has opened because of how well the analogies are sort of given across. Yeah. And you mentioned that more recently there was a more rigor because the scientific method presented a systematic way of gaining I'm not going to say the truth because it develops every time, but it's saying like, here's the best guess that we have now. Everybody do your best to prove this wrong but remain open to it. Actually, the possibility of this being a tighter fit, a better model for what's really going on there. And science has now sort of described energy in ways that are actually quite convergent with if you have the right analogies and sort of the right posture and the right positioning to what's also being said across spiritual traditions as well. And you also made the point that a lot of the scientists that created these really tight-fitting models were very spiritual in the first place. You know, if we talk about Newton, he was really obsessed with alchemy, which in this day and age is sort of laughed upon. But again, as you were mentioning, an important point here is if you were in that context, that's actually quite a worthy pursuit and is really was actually quite a sensible thing to be putting time, effort, and energy into.
And I'd like to suggest things fall in and out of favor as we understand more about them. Alchemy, as described, seems ludicrous to a modern chemist, to a modern physicist. But I'm saying it's the weakness in the description. And again, you hit so beautifully when you said these ancient traditions are describing oftentimes the same phenomenon, but it is their language that causes people to go, oh yeah, woo-woo. You think about the god Shiva, and that literally can represent this unmanifest energy. Perfectly calm, balanced energy. You think of the goddess, Kali, this destructive, energetic, we're whipping that stuff up and turning it into Maya, as they say. Illusion. It's not this, it's this, but it's whipped up to look like this. And that's just one tradition. They're analogies. They're projecting what they understand at the time onto something they don't understand. Let's look carefully at the thing they don't understand and try to help understand it. Let's use all these different approaches. Use what's useful, abandon what isn't. But J. Robert Oppenheimer, the lead physicist on the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb, the minute that puppy blew up, and he was watching what he had only understood academically, he watched it in action. He quoted his own translation of the Bhagavad Gita. He said, I'm trying to remember it, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Because this guy, who's the head feather on the Manhattan Project, is reading in Sanskrit, I might add, the Bhagavad Gita, a millennia's old sacred text from India. These guys were smart. They knew where to go. And I'm asking us all to kind of keep an open mind, but not so open that our brains fall out. That's all.
Okay, Jim. So I think that has given us a very good overview of how our understanding of energy has evolved as humans. I'm curious as to how has your understanding of energy evolved personally?
Wow. So I've said frequently, and I hope nobody thinks I'm just saying this or kidding, I am the luckiest guy on earth, and I'm lucky for so many reasons I can't even begin to count. But in this case, I am lucky to have been given the most precious gift I've ever been given, and that is the ability to quiet my mind, to relax my body, to calm my emotions enough to be fully present in any given present moment and be utterly and completely absorbed in what I'm learning. I have found that takes learning anything out of a kind of academic, idea-based thing and enriches it. This is not to say the ideas aren't vital, but when the ideas come down out of the mind and just come into the body and you feel them, you're really starting to embody this cognition. That's more in line with what real knowing is. So the ability to quiet my mind enabled me to not be stuck in what I was starting to get stuck in, which is just a kind of an academic pursuit. It was curiosity, yeah, but I was learning facts about things. And this approach changed everything. It changed how I learn. So these analogies, these expressions that were just purely academic became alive for me. And let me give you an example of this, because this is how my understanding of energy has gotten where it is now, whatever that's worth. I think most people who've had any kind of even elementary science or physics in school, high school level, learn this fact. Matter is mostly empty space. This matter, mostly empty space. Well, my response to that is, okay, if you say so, but that ain't empty. At my level of apprehension, my human scale perception, that is a meaningless statement. And I think most people will agree with that. It's only when you can expand your scope of context a little and get out of this prison of this is my scope of context, do you understand what this means? So being able to get still enabled me to climb down into different scopes of context. And I wasn't demanding that, say, the atomic and subatomic level come up and make me comfortable. I went down into it and tried to get more comfortable in the reality of it. So what happened was this analogy of matter, empty space, came to life. And it made it easier for me to share that in conjunction with stillness with other people. So watch what happens. If we take an atom, let's take the simplest atom we can come up with. Simplest, lightest element, hydrogen, in our periodic table. It's got one proton in the nucleus. It's got one electron spinning around it. And for the geeks out there who are saying, well, yeah, there's different isotopes, and I'm talking protium now, the most common form of hydrogen, not deuterium, not tritium. I'm talking about hydrogen as the simplest element we've got. It's mostly empty space, but that still doesn't help us. So, if that hydrogen atom were blown up, expanded to the size of an entire football stadium, okay? Our single proton in the nucleus would be the size of an orange, medium-sized orange, in the middle of the 50-yard line. You couldn't even see it from up in the stands. The electron in that atom would be the size of a pea on the outer rim of that football stadium, whirling around. Okay? Everything else in that atom is empty space. Not just mostly empty space, 99.99% empty space. But here's where this comes to life. That empty space is anything but empty. Yeah, it doesn't have any matter in it, no thing in it, but it's teeming with this energy, this pure energy, pure potential energy. I am now talking quantum mechanics. I'm not talking woo-woo tea and patchouli. There is so much energy in this empty space, unconverted into matter, in infinite potential, waiting, that if you took the empty space of the atom, you can't even see it. That empty space, you take the proton and toss it, the electron, toss it, the little orange and little pea, and throw it. The empty space left in that atom has more energy, more potential energy, what they call energy density in quantum mechanics, than all the matter, all the protons, neutrons, and electrons in the entire visible universe. There's more energy in that little bit of empty space than in all the physical matter in the entire universe, all the planets, all the stars, all the galaxies, all of it. So for me, that suddenly came to life, and I realized that is a freaking religious experience. That's not something I'm going to spit back in a physics test and get an A on. What does that mean? We're that energy. I can feel that energy when I get quiet enough. I remember who I am when I get quiet enough. And more importantly, for my practical day-to-day life, I remember you are too. So is everyone else. I'm not separate and apart from everyone and everything else, as my egoic narrative would have me believe. Let's take a look at what that gives me. Well, I can tell you what my egoic narrative gives me. A lot of suffering, a lot of feeling of separate, isolated, incomplete. This gives me a profound sense of unity and wholeness because it's not a concept. I get quiet enough, I can feel it. I get quiet enough, and you and I have gotten quiet enough, and so have hundreds of people at Still Life, gotten quiet enough to begin to see this in someone sitting across from them. And we don't push them. They just do. They're seeing past the disguise of matter to what's really there. Now, I don't talk in these terms very frequently because we don't have the background that we've built, you and I, in this podcast series. I'd sound like I was out of my mind. I'm simply stating a fact in terms of energy. That's profoundly changed my understanding of energy. But it's changed it at all scopes of context. It is so practical. Because when I do the work I do with clients, I'm not sorting for what's wrong with them. I'm not sorting for their problems. I'm literally remembering we're the same, energetically speaking. We just get right past problems like that. And we get to the only real problem. The problem is your response to these situations, perturbations in energy. What do those perturbations mean? At different levels, they mean life and death, or, God, what was I even concerned about?
So we stumbled into a bit of Hinduism earlier, and I think that there are a couple of concepts, a couple of models from India that are really quite interesting.
You bet.
In terms of perturbations of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And two that come to mind that are sort of one's deemed far more woo-woo than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious if you could shed light on this, because you mentioned how you've worked with clients, and before you did more of a stillness practice, you were a body worker.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like an energetic practice in itself.
Purely.
It's called energy work,
Yes,
right? Which
purely.
can turn a lot of people off just through the name of it.
Yeah.
However, when talking about chakras, energy centers
Mm-hmm.
in the body,
Mm-hmm.
and also samskara, which is psychological energy,
Yes.
sort of being trapped
Blocked.
because
Yes.
of certain trauma potentially.
Sure.
Fear-based reactions to
Yes.
external circumstances that we can't control.
Yes.
So we create neurological shortcuts to sort of bypass those situations in the future.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could just expand upon your experience working with energy,
Yeah.
with both chakras and samskaras
Yeah.
in your client work.
Well, first, both my wife and I would work together, what we call four hands work. Her hands are roughly half, a little more than half the size of mine, and the clients on the table couldn't tell our hands apart because they weren't feeling our hands. They were feeling the energy of what we were doing. And I'm suggesting, as woo-woo as that may sound, we all, three of us, my wife, myself, and the client, would start dropping more and more of these artificial, illusory boundaries, and we worked as a single unit to unblock these things. When I would work with certain clients, if they were highly scientific or just intellectual, if I talk to them about chakras, your heart chakra, they're just going to turn off. That's language, not the essence of the thing. So I just shift gears and talk to them about the cardiac plexus, the nerve plexus. Oh, okay. We're still doing the same work. We're just calling it your solar plexus. We're not talking about a particular chakra anymore. Yeah, we're talking about a phenomenon. What do you call it? Pickle. It doesn't matter what you call it.
Just to pause you quickly, that falls very well into identity because, we're just using different symbols.
Yes.
And ones that we're more familiar with in terms of which are more proximal.
Yes.
And which signal in-grouping.
Yes.
And ones that we've had more sort of indoctrination
Yes.
to
Yeah.
are more comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know for a fact for me, when we first started doing work, I've definitely fell in the latter category because if you started talking to me about chakras right off the bat, I'd probably be like, great, this guy's a little...
That's right.
Little bat.
And in fairness, I'm going to say that where we live in Venice, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting some whack job. And I'm saying whack job because they haven't done the work to speak authentically and with genuine expertise on these things. And so the water that is already incredibly subtle and tough to see through is obscured by, charlatanism. So I'm not saying you shouldn't be suspicious of somebody who is saying, my crystal is picking up waveforms from Alpha Centauri right now, and it's telling me I need to go, watch a movie. Okay. What I'm saying is, in a bizarre way, can you be scientific about that? Can you test this? And that's what we used to do. In one way or another, call it what you want, energy from an experience that isn't allowed to fully pass through because it's either traumatic and we want to avoid it. And again, suppression and repression is a form of avoidance. Or conversely, something is so deliciously pleasurable, we don't want to let it go. So we cling to it. Same thing. That energy isn't allowed to just come and go, and we're present. We're now mapping onto past events, creating preferences, analogously creating preferences. This thing that I'm experiencing now is like this thing I experienced when I was 5, and I don't like it, so I'm pushing it away. Feel what that feels like. It's creating tension in your body. That tension is keeping that flow of energy from happening. We can talk more about that if you want later. So we used to work with this, but most people who do body work just start in hammering away all elbows and knees on somebody's body. I'm saying we used to go and do state work for an hour before we ever started on the table. We would get their state where their body was relaxed, their mind was quiet, clear, still, and their emotions were calm. Then we'd start working on the table. The weird thing is, we were literally so open that when someone was talking about some issue it was literally as if something picks your hand up and says, start working here. Now, we had studied a lot about, I've been studying anatomy since I was 17. So you're working this thing. You're doing what they call cross-fibering this thing over here on their left hip. And they are saying, oh. And because we've done the work with them and we're working together, they would just be totally open. They'd start tearing up. They'd start crying. Why? I'm just rubbing a spot on your hip. That's where it's stored. The neurology is storing these events for future reference, trying to keep you safe. Avoid things like this in the future. I'm saying that that's already served its purpose, and we would simply rub it out. And if they were relaxed enough, they were going in the opposite direction of what they normally do, which is tense up and reinforce that blockage. I'm suggesting strategically, for practical purposes, you want to get rid of a block of energy. Anytime something reminds you of it, triggers you, go the opposite direction. Relax your body and watch what happens. These stored things start leaving your body. They don't want to be in there. They've served their purpose. We do this psychologically. We do this in terms of state work. We do parts work, and we do body work. The point is, get this stuff out of there so you can be present. That's all energy in one form or another.
Cool. I'm going to time out for a second. So if somebody has a traumatic experience happen to them, they have the primary of all negative emotions trigger, which is fear, right? And that can manifest in tension in the body and constrict energy from flowing.
Yes.
That constriction of energy flow can then be codified in the body in certain areas and stored for future use in case something that's analogous comes up, that you can replay that pattern and hopefully bypass any further trauma or fear-based responses to increase your likelihood of survival.
Yes. So first thing, thank your body for trying to help you. Don't, I must be crazy. No. Thank it.
And then, so what you're talking about is you do a lot of state work to get somebody's state into a very open place.
And relaxed.
So that when these triggers are re-triggered in a safe environment, it goes similar to the sort of deconditioning, the progressive deconditioning that you mentioned before, where it's like, cool, here it's coming back up and you're sort of following intuition here. You've got your map of how the body works because you've studied it conceptually.
Yes.
But at the same time, I'm just going to let go and I'm going to follow whatever's there because I'm reading energy.
Because their energy is talking to me.
Absolutely.
Just not in English sentences.
Not at all.
Yep.
But you're feeling that.
Yes.
Because you're not enforcing a narrative that's telling you it's like, okay, now it's minute 3, I need to start on the left bicep.
Yes.
It's like, no, let's get rid of the narrative and just open up to whatever information needs to come in here.
Yes.
I don't want to perceive the emotion. I don't want to perceive the thoughts. I'm here at this level of energy. So I'm letting that guide me. Here we have a knot. This is going right back to a patient on the table's trauma. They are so open that they don't constrict around the re-triggering. And this allows you to detach, to decondition the pairing of stimulus from response, so that when that stimulus then happens in the future, that person doesn't have a reflexive response that is so constricted and fear-based, and so is able to release the traumatic event, which in the Hindu terminology could be a samskara.
Samskara. But that enables us to begin a new practice, because it doesn't just go away. Your body's not stupid. The new practice is every time that thing gets triggered, you're now going to go back to the state we were in on the table. Instead of constricting and knotting it up even more, you're relaxing. You're letting this energy flow. It wants to leave. It didn't want to be bound up. So it's not just releasing it once, it's creating a new habit of letting go. That's why stillness is so critical to this thing. Somebody says something and triggers you. You can just perpetuate your habits, or you can look at that, stop, create a habit of going in the other direction. Relax. Relax.
I think this is such a good time to introduce the concept of surrender.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time when we think about surrender from a Western perspective, it's like we
White flag.
Yeah, it's a white flag, but there's still so much constriction,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
still so much attachment.
Yeah.
And the defeat itself is a relegation of status
Right.
that has an emotional response to it that's negative,
Right.
Whereas I think surrender in spiritual texts is actually turning to face the monster within yourself and completely letting go. There is absolutely no constriction. There is surrender in the sense where it's like, I'm fully open.
Yes.
I'm fully aware.
Yeah.
And it's like an acceptance and a leaning into whatever that is. And so I think that that's a really key point. At least I wish that point was made to me in an earlier stage.
Sure.
Because changing the conception, changing the idea of what it means to surrender,
Yes.
then gives you a whole different sort of behavioral template to approach these triggers in the future. Where it's like, okay, surrender doesn't mean, oh, I'm scared of that dog, so I'm just surrendering and I'm like kind of moving away, but like really not processing that emotion at a deeper level.
Right.
It's the processing aspect where it's like, okay, here I am, I need to let go, remember to expand my state and to feel this emotion as vividly as I can.
Yes.
To turn, face it, give it 100% of my sort of awareness on the inside. Instead of trying to shift it and repress it and change it,
Yes.
it's just completely allow it to come through. And as that passes, it doesn't stick. It doesn't as you mentioned before, tie into a knot within myself that then I'll have to, hopefully if I have the privilege, have to undo in the future if I have that sort of state and the circumstances fall into my favor.
It doesn't repress on you. My point is, that doesn't mean if there's some snarling dog, you walk up and pet it. It just means you're not knotted up and experiencing 50 other dogs that are all built on that first dog that bit you when you were 3. Because you're not present with this dog. All this stuff has lit up. You're hallucinating. You're back here. If you want to be present with this dog, have this completely open and you'll know exactly what to do.
And as a byproduct of that, you will update your behavioral templates to be more accurate to stimulus in the future.
Yeah.
And it could be, that dog's pretty pissed and I should probably run away.
Sure. But I'm not going to be constricted in a knot of previous fear. I will be able to run faster. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
My body will be in an optimal condition to be better than if I were knotted up in tension.
And just to make this incredibly practical, it's like to be better, if you aren't just solely focused on that one sort of memory that's being triggered within your mind, if you're completely still, right, your visual attention, like all of your sensory inputs are far more open.
Yes.
At that point, you have so much more at your disposal to be able to use creatively.
That's right.
To be able to do whatever needs to be done in that situation.
Yeah.
And so it's actually really advantageous to get into that state, to be 100% present instead of 4 steps behind it, playing an old pattern that might actually be limiting you, not in just what you need to do, but in what's available to you to be able to do anything.
It's exactly right. It's exactly right. I am not saying that means write welcome on your chest and lie down and let every creature or person walk on you. You're just not knotted up. The energy's flowing through you. I have watched people literally who have trouble with dogs learn how to let go of the energetic car alarm that's agitating a dog. They've been able to relax enough that they're not sending a kind of energetic car alarm out. The dog thinks you're a freak. They have calmed down. The dog calms down, strangely enough, because this is what good dog trainers do. They spend most of their time on the other side of the leash. I've got a lot of dog trainers for clients, and most of them are very interested in stillness, just intrinsically, because it's part of what they have to do, part of what they have to be good with dogs. So I'm just suggesting that that is energy at work in different forms.
Well, it's the same with horses. It's the same with sharks.
It's the same with people.
And bees, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like if you approach a situation with that apprehension and with that fear, that's picked up on. You are sending those signals. And so what the other receiver has to work with is that. And what are their behavioral templates that they then play?
Right.
But I feel like you're training horses, you have to be absolutely right here, right now.
Right.
Otherwise, that horse isn't going to pay attention to you.
Yes.
If you want to swim with sharks, you don't want to be emitting fear.
That's right.
Otherwise, they're just going to think, pray, pray, pray. Yum, 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 right?
Or even threat.
Yeah.
And all I'm suggesting is people who swim with sharks learn how to control their state, but they also respect the shark enough to learn the shark's communication. A shark is going to tell you, it's going to signal when it is feeling threatened, when it's feeling agitated, just like dogs do. Human beings tend to be ignorant of that because we have this problem. We want the universe to come into our field, make us comfortable. I'm saying when you get still, you start going into the universe's field and you're going to actually understand more and more. Very practically, not in some woo-woo way.
Well, Jim, I'm really glad that you've understood this very practically, and the work that you've done with your clients. I am in that line of people that are extremely grateful to you. And thank you for this conversation. Thank you for shedding light on a very squirrely topic. You're putting a box around something that cannot be boxed once again.
Socks on an octopus.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be shooting Failure next, and I'm incredibly excited to talk with you about that. But in the meantime, I hope that you just remain the luckiest man on earth. I love you, thank you, and we'll chat soon.
Bless your heart. I love you right back, and I mean it. You've done beautifully with this. Thank you. And as always, thank you. You're why we're doing this. And please be as involved as you choose to be. But test this yourself. Get quiet, get better and better at that, and you tell me what happens in delightful and surprising ways. See you soon.